Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Catherine Biarahanga. We begin in Russia, where Vladimir Putin has vowed to strengthen the armed forces and prioritise what he calls Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. Speaking after a presidential election which delivered him more than 80% of the vote, Mr. Putin said the results had demonstrated people's trust in Russia's current path. He said when Russians were united, no one could intimidate or suppress them. As our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg reports, in a rare move, Mr. Putin also mentioned his late critic Alexei Navalny by name.
For Vladimir Putin, 6 more years in the Kremlin. Russia's president is sounding more confident than ever.
Whoever might want to intimidate us, whoever might want to suppress us, our will and our conscience, they have never been able to do it and never will.
Then, Mr. Putin's first public comments on the death of jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny.
You may be surprised, but a few days before Mr. Navalny died, some colleagues of mine told me there was an idea to exchange him for certain people in prison in the West. You can believe it or not. I said, I agree, even before he'd finished talking. But what happened, happened.
Election results on Russian TV, not a hold-your-breath moment. The winner, by 1.5 miles, Vladimir Putin. What an incredible level of support and unity around the figure of Putin, he says, and a powerful signal to the West. But in this race, Vladimir Putin was, from the start, unbeatable. There were other candidates, but no serious challenger. Potential rivals here are swiftly removed from the political stage, forced into exile or put in jail. And elections tightly controlled by the Kremlin. But if they couldn't win, Mr. Putin's opponents could at least protest. And they did, in many parts of Russia. Opposition figures had called on Russians to flood polling stations at midday, to vote against Putin or spoil their ballots, a symbolic protest against the system. We were here. I've never seen queues like this before at a Russian polling station. Before his death in prison, Alexei Navalny had backed the protest. It took courage to come. The authorities had warned that large crowds at noon would be viewed as illegal gatherings.
I was here as a member.
Ivan, not his real name, told me why he'd come.
It was important for me to see faces of other people who would come here today and to see that I'm not alone in my political views and that there are a lot of Muscovites and other people who believe that Russia can be another country with another future.
For now, there'll be no change in the Kremlin. This election was never about would Vladimir Putin win or wouldn't he. Elections here are designed to ensure he wins, and wins big. From the outset, for the Kremlin, this vote was about creating the impression that Mr. Putin has a mandate from his people, not only for war in Ukraine, but also for what he's doing at home, transforming Russia into an increasingly militaristic society in confrontation with the West. But across town, Muscovites continued to pay tribute to Alexei Navalny, the man who'd wanted to be Russia's president. Here, a ballot paper, in place of Putin's name, Navalny's. And this message: he's the candidate we wanted.
Well, for more on this, we can speak to Vitaly. Alexei Navalny's name in public at the time when we saw some protests at polling stations in Russia.
Yes, that's one thing that was surprising about what was essentially his acceptance speech last night. For the first time ever, Vladimir Putin mentioned the name of his biggest adversary, political rival, who's now dead. Perhaps it shows how confident and emboldened Vladimir Putin is after this election exercise. Of course, he did win big, but still the figure of more than 87% of the vote, which the authorities announced with almost all of the votes counted, it's pretty big, and it shows that Vladimir Putin will continue unopposed and continue to govern Russia unrivaled. So from that point of view, Russia is waking up this morning pretty much the way it was yesterday and the day before, with Vladimir Putin firmly in control and ruling unopposed, with no organized political power or political figure within Russia to challenge him.
So this vote showing the dominance of Vladimir Putin in Russia, what do you think it means for life in Russia? What do the next 6 years hold for Russians there?
Well, with this election out of the way, it will be easier for Vladimir Putin to take unpopular steps, such as possibly announcing more mobilization of troops to go and fight in Ukraine, possibly raising taxes. But the fact is, the figure that the authorities have announced, it's all but impossible to check, and it's something that we've seen come from authoritarian regimes where there's no freedom of speech, no freedom of media, and the electoral authorities are completely and totally controlled by the government. And the whole point of the exercise is to reconfirm and validate Vladimir Putin's continued rule.
You mentioned there the war in Ukraine. What does this victory mean for how Mr. Putin conducts the war there and his relationships with other countries who are opposing him?
Well, it's interesting that the Russian authorities have announced an even bigger share of the votes supposedly cast for Vladimir Putin in occupied parts of Ukraine, bigger than 92% in some occupied parts of Ukraine. And listening to what Vladimir Putin said last night, he was extremely belligerent and unapologetic, and I think it's reasonable to assume that he will continue what he has been doing in Ukraine for more than 2 years now, and this is definitely bad news for Ukraine. More attacks, more death, and more destruction. This is one big reason why this election was held in the first place, to try and demonstrate to people in Russia and abroad, to send the message that, look, the people of Russia want Vladimir Putin. This is what the Kremlin and Kremlin-controlled electoral authorities want to show right now.
Thank you. That's the BBC's Vitaly Shevchenko there.